Welcome to Health, Wellbeing and Lifestyle, where experts in the field inform, educate and inspire our community to be healthier, more balanced and live the lifestyle they love. Our first guest today, Melissa Heeman, is a trauma therapist and author. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, Melissa, what is trauma and how does it relate to our relationships with others?
Sure. So trauma is actually a response that we have to something that we feel very scared of. So it can be when we're growing up or even when we're older, where we feel a strong stress response. So we feel very strong emotions, like our survival is being threatened. And these emotions in our body get trapped in our body. So it's not just trauma as in what most people think, as in they've seen a car accident, been in a car accident, or they've been to war and there's trauma in that sense. That there is those traumas, but there's also smaller traumas that greatly impact us as well. Like if we stood in front of the class and we were little and we got laughed at, and then that trauma response could be, I don't like doing public speaking anymore. And it can be micro traumas as well with our parents when they yell at us, or we've been left to cry it out as a baby. That can be a very large trauma for someone because there's no safety. There's no one there to help them with that survival response, and it gets stuck in their body. And how it can affect us in our relationships is if we do have that trauma, say with our primary caregivers growing up, where they yelled at us and were abusive towards us in any way, or they neglected us, what we do is we think on a subconscious level that that is a blueprint for how love is and how relationships should be. And so we unconsciously seek out people that were often like our parents. Unfortunately, if the parent wasn't very nice, we'll seek out a partner that is similar to them, because our body feels that that is normal. And so some people are like, why do I keep getting into bad relationships? Or why does this keep happening to me? Why do I find myself isolating myself and having a lot of conflict with anyone? And if we think back to our childhood and what we saw growing up, it can really give us some indication as to why these patterns are occurring in our lives in regards to relationships. With trauma usually happens in relationships. So we say trauma can be relational because it's happened with either a caregiver or an authority or someone else. And so we carry that trauma in our bodies, and we often carry it into relationships that we have as we become older, as we find a partner, but then even relationships with our kids, our co-workers, the people in the line with us at the shopping centre in the queue. We're all relating, and so certain things can get triggered that we don't even consciously know why, but that person's made us very angry, or we had a very strong emotional response. So we might say something or behave in a way that is maybe an overreaction to the actual circumstance, and we can't come in with it with a neutral mind, and that's usually because a trauma has been triggered from maybe a long time ago. And if people became more aware of that, they would be able to maybe seek help and find someone to help them work through it, so they can be a more peaceful person, so their relationships can be more peaceful, so they know how to work through conflict in a non-violent way. So yeah, it's really important that we're aware of trauma and how it can impact our relationships.
Could you explain the link between trauma and domestic violence?
Yeah, so that's a really important discussion, and I think it's a problem that is really being exacerbated at the moment. So what normally happens is with trauma is that we reenact our trauma. Okay, so I'll just give you an example for domestic violence because I have my own personal history of that. My mother watched her parents be in a domestic violence situation. So her father would drink alcohol, and he would get very triggered and angry and violent. And so my mother, as a toddler, felt she had to defend her mother and be strong. And then later, when my mum was in her 20s and she met my father, who was a lovely, peaceful man, she almost sabotaged that relationship because it didn't feel normal to her nervous system. That trauma had created a blueprint of no relationship should be violent, even though she didn't consciously want that. So she left my father and got with another man. And he was actually very similar to her father. He would actually do domestic violence in their house, and I witnessed that. And my little brother and sister were very young, and at 16 I had to help her leave that situation. But even though with all of that, when I became a young adult and got into a relationship, I was attracted to people that were controlling and abusive, and I ended up in a domestic violence situation myself. For some reason, my body was just drawn to that. So it's not in every circumstance, but in a lot, we're just recreating what we saw in childhood. I guess you could say I was the victim, but also my low self-esteem, my insecurity, and my allowance allowed me to stay in that relationship for a little while. And then when I started doing the healing work with a therapist, then I realized that, and I realized I could break this generational pattern and cycle.
What advice would you have for our viewers that are feeling like they're experiencing trauma in their relationships at the moment?
I would say that everyone is probably, if you're in a relationship with anyone, you're probably going to have experiences with trauma. And the way that you can indicate and know that you are is if you're having quite strong emotional responses. If you find yourself in a fear state, or in a very angry or controlling state where you want to change the other person's behavior to make yourself feel better. Or we can replay what we saw in childhood and maybe want to start fights, or we saw our mother be very quiet, so we go very quiet and we don't speak our truth. So just being aware, just having a think about how did that look like for me growing up, and am I overly reacting or overly shutting down in my relationship with this person? If you feel like you're having some of these symptoms or these relational trauma issues, then definitely seek a professional, a therapist, to work through it if you believe there's something there.
That's such valuable and important information, Melissa. If you'd like to know more about Melissa and how trauma affects our relationships with other people, please go to her webpage on our website, wellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And after the break, we have another interesting guest with another interesting topic.
Stay tuned. After the break, psychotherapist specialising in hypnotherapy, Julie Macon, will be talking about find freedom from a habit or an addiction. Welcome back. Our second guest is Julie Macon, a psychotherapist specialising in hypnotherapy, and we will be discussing how to find freedom from an addiction or a habit. So good to see you again, Julie.
Thank you.
So can you define for us what is an addiction and what is a habit?
Yes. So how I would say about a definition, and this is Gabor Mate's, for an addiction, it's anything that provides you with relief, that gives you pleasure, something that you crave, and it may have negative consequences. And even if it has negative consequences, you still continue to do it. So I feel that that is a great definition for what an addiction actually is. What I would say about a habit, so let's just say that somebody might have a habit about getting ready in the morning, and just perhaps they, leave something out, or they don't do something, and then maybe they might start to get a little bit agitated or worried, or, they start going into that fight-flight state. So that's the way I would go about saying a habit. Now, as far as addictions are concerned, it can really be anything. So it could be, the good old chocolate addiction, or maybe there's, the more the hardened ones like the drugs or the alcohol. People who go to gym and they get addicted to the pain in their body from doing their workout. That is an addiction. So it can be anything that is a substance or a behavior.
Why do people have addictions and habits?
Let's just say we have an uncomfortable emotion that comes up. Just for this purpose, let's just call it anxiety. Okay, we all know that anxiety is really uncomfortable to sit in, really uncomfortable. And I can actually remember one particular moment for myself when I'm, at a party, and I've got my glass sitting on the wooden table in front of me, and it's full of water. And, my friends are around and they're having a great time. They're singing, the music is blaring, and I'm reaching over to get my glass and my hand is shaking. I grab the glass and I can see the glass, the water starting to shake in there. I have to use my second hand in order to stabilize it because the anxiety is so bad, just to get the glass to my mouth. So anxiety can come up in different ways for you. It can be so powerful. Now, when we've got our anxiety that's coming up, a lot of people, because we're sitting in that discomfort, we need to soothe that pain. And we might do that with smoking or gambling or a drug, whether it be prescription or perhaps, more recreational drug. There's so many different things that this can help, but this helps to soothe that pain and just puts it back down. And we get to a point where, we might feel uncomfortable in our environment. This might start coming up, but you don't feel it, you don't recognize it because this is already on it, helping us. So the first thought that you might get is, oh, I really need that cigarette or whatever. And it's already there helping soothe it. Now this might be, so whatever the addiction or behavior, whether it be substance, that could actually be soothing the pain. It could be your time out. It could be your escape. Whatever it is, I invite whoever feels that they might have an addiction or a habit, I invite them to get really compassionate for themselves, okay?
So you've mentioned self-compassion. Is there other tools that people can use to help with their addiction or their habit?
Absolutely. I think that the first thing to notice is if you start having this anxiety come up and perhaps you have your first thought of wanting that cigarette or, that first drink of alcohol or whatever it is for you, whatever your coping mechanism is, I invite you to hold off from having it and just begin to notice and have an awareness of what it is that's coming up for you. So it might be agitation in the body. Your hands might start to shake. You might feel your heart start to race. But then what I'd really invite your guests to notice is if they can go inside their body, really focus on that part of the body and really thank it, because an emotion is made up of all physical sensations. Just imagine if you've got an emotion, if you were to think of it like an opera. Okay, now an opera can be so extremely powerful. It has the power to make you laugh, make you cry, make you happy, or make you sad. But if you can imagine the power that opera would have if there was just the one instrument playing, just like if there was just the one physical sensation that you were focused on, what would the power then be?
What practical advice do you have for our viewers?
Okay, so the practical advice that I would provide viewers is that if they, after completing that little exercise that I just provided, so just holding off and just noticing what is coming up in the body, if that makes you feel uncomfortable, please seek a professional therapist. Once again, we're looking at all different types of modalities. So whatever is right for you, my suggestion would be for somebody to seek somebody that works with the body, because it's the body that's where it's at. I know that there has previously been people who have worked with particular therapists for maybe three years, and they may have had an emotional eating issue. But then when they've gone and sought help with working with the body, it really didn't take long for them to just drop that emotional eating issue, and they were able to, feel safer in the world. They were approaching things differently. So it really depends on the person, what is right and safe for them as to what action of therapy it is that they take. But I strongly suggest people have a look at different associations, because you want to know that those people are qualified. You don't want to just go off and choose anybody. But you want to go to associations, have a look at what practitioners it is that they suggest on their web pages.
Thank you, Julie.
No worries.
If you would like to know more about Julie Makin and addictions and habits, please visit her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And after the break, we'll be back with another interesting guest and another interesting topic.
Stay tuned. After the break is youth educator Marilou Coombe talking about whether the youth of today are getting optimum levels of support growing up. Welcome back, and our last guest for today is youth educator Marilou Coombe, and she's going to be talking about whether the youth of today are getting the optimum level of support that they need as they grow up. Welcome, Marilou.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
It's our pleasure. So tell me, are the youth of today getting the optimum level of support as they grow up?
There's two parts to that question, two-part answer. There's a part where I say yes, they are, as far as what government and schools and so on are doing. Like, I'll give you an example. Growing up, we only had TAFE, high school that you went to. And if you didn't fit into either of those, well, bad luck kind of thing, you're a dropout. Whereas now kids have a lot more option in different pathways that they can follow, whether it's online learning, whether it's VCAL, whether it's trades. So there's a lot and so much more I probably don't even know about, but there is so many more choices there for them. That's just like in one area. For example, if you want to have a look at the mental health of young people, growing up, we didn't even have wellbeing coordinators at school. Tough luck if you were having an issue, like that was on the parents to go find you somebody. Whereas now there's that available at school. There's a whole bunch of organizations like Headspace, a lot of things out there for youth that are available. And I think all these things are great. However, why I say no is because we're still seeing higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of youth issues. Let's just lump everything under like youth issues without going into the details. And so I question sometimes how effective all these choices are when we're still not getting those optimal results. Like we've got higher anxiety in children, high depression in children, low self-belief. So my question is with, why aren't these things as effective as they can be? And that to me is there's something lacking. So I don't feel like the kids are as supported as much as what they can be, because they don't get to also take away those practical tools that they can implement in their everyday life because of all these kind of choices that they have. And then it's like, what do they really focus on that they can take away to apply for that when they're just jumping from one thing to another?
So what needs to be done for practitioners to be able to achieve that optimum outcome with the youth?
So a few things. As a youth practitioner myself and as well as an educator, I think it's really, really important to fill your own cup first. I have seen way too many practitioners, whether they're working for themselves or working for somebody else, like as a youth worker, psychologist, counsellor, wellbeing coordinator at school, is a lot of the time they're quite burnt out and they're not looking after themselves. Now, we can give all the tools and all the processes to young people, but if our energy is not matching that and we're worn out, kids speak energy more than anything. So they're going to be unconsciously listening to that. Yeah, I can't tell a young person to self-care and give them a whole plan on how to self-care and how to look after themselves better if I'm not looking after myself as a practitioner. So this was quite a big problem, to have for kids that needed it right now, right here. And they're under-resourced. I feel like we're quite under-resourced in this area. We create these great organizations that can support our kids, but then they're under-resourced and we can't access them as quickly as what we need to for immediate emergency issues that are happening in real life, you know, rather than waiting that 6-9 months wait where a child in particular has already moved through that problem, is into something else now, and it escalates. Yeah. So I feel like that's a really big issue that practitioners are facing in particular. So I would say fill your own cup first, make sure you're taking care of yourself, walk your talk with young people. I think that's really, really, really important. And then look for outside resources of yourself to support that young person if you can't as a practitioner. I think that's really important.
So what advice would you give to everyone in that sector as a whole? So whether they're a practitioner, part of an organization, parents, or even the youths who are looking for support?
I go back to always filling our own cup first. I think that is really, really important. And I think as practitioners and, you know, organizations and so on, we're constantly going in thinking we have to fix a young person up. Well, there's nothing to fix about a young person. What they really need is to feel supported, to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel like they've got a space where they are feeling safe to be able to unpack and unload. I think that's the most important thing. What we need to do is focus on making them feel like they are a human, having an experience, rather than the experience fitting the human. So what I mean by that is there's no cookie cutter for working with young people. My favourite phrase that I do say is meet the young person where they're at, rather than their label or the diagnosis or any of that sort of stuff. So I think that's really important, because then that creates a space for that young person where they feel like, hey, you see me for who I am, you understand me, you get me, rather than being focused on the processes or on the bureaucratic side of stuff, or on what we need to tick off a list, or, you know, our kids must learn gratitude, or our kids must learn resilience, where it's like, no, collaborate, work with that kid, meet them where they're at, work with their nervous system to get them those results, rather than what fits in that box.
Could you expand for me what it means to meet them where they're at? How do I do that?
So let me give you an example of how to meet a child where they're at. Quite often we come in with a label or a diagnosis, and it's like we need to fit them into this box, rather than just talking to the actual child and seeing exactly what's going on for them and working on that with them, rather than the whole label, because of whatever condition they have.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Marilou.
Thank you for having me here.
If you would like to know more about the youth getting the support they need as they grow up, or more about Marilou, you can head over to her webpage, which is on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. That is it for today's episode, but we'll see you back again soon. If you'd like to know more about our show, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.